Alright, this should be a fun and deeply controversial video on the most broken cards in Triple Triad. Let's specify a little. I think in general, Triple Triad is a really well balanced game. FF8 clearly understood some of how awesome a thing it was creating and clearly didn't understand some other things. But they made a superb game that anyone watching this video is certainly in love with. And I think in general, there's clearly variety of strength of cards on a level, and there are cards you'd much rather see in a random, and there are cards that basically get no tournament play, and cards that get a ton. But there's really a lot of balance. There's a lot of tools. It's not like using a subpar card as a death sentence, or even going to put you substantially behind. You can test this pretty easily with the solver. And it's a really good game with really good tools to do stuff. Ooh, maybe I should have actually done this video with solver tests. Ooh, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Of like, take kind of standard hands, like a few example of standard hands, and sub some of these cards in for cards that are like for the same corner, say. That could be an interesting effect, and just see what the just from the starting position or given a specific starter, what the win rate for the hand is, or how many losses the opponent has against it with the new card or with the standard card. That could be an interesting way. It wouldn't be very scientific, but it could be a kind of interesting way to compare, because a lot of these cards that we're going to talk about are on different levels, and so it's hard to compare their power directly because they're each trying to dominate on a different level. So maybe there's something interesting to do there for a future video. So today I want to look at cards that are going to push that balance. So sometimes these will be cards that were allowances of the original FF8, some of the more ambitious cards allowed. But a lot of what I want to look at is cards that break the FF8 rules. Now that or go past what FF8 explicitly laid out. Now that doesn't mean these cards are unfair or broken or overpowered, because actually my conclusion for most of these cards is that they're well within fair range, um, or at least a bunch of them. Or even if they're not within fair range, you can't really get rid of them without doing more damage. So I'm actually not going to claim many cards are broken or unfair. I actually think most stuff is, again, really well balanced and really fair, or quite fair. But yeah, I want to explore when there's something that is pushing a boundary, which might not be quite the same as the most broken cards. So something like 7571 on level 5. This is, I believe, not an FF8. There's 7472, but not 7571. There's no 775s on level 5. Um, but it turns out this is just not a game breaker. And for instance, 7471 or 7741 is often going to be more desirable than 7751 because the 7-4 part lets you take other 7s with plus wall. The 4-1 also has nice plus walls. And often the 7741 is just better than the 7751. So we have pushed a boundary, and it's, I think, just a very good cards to add to the pool. Maybe they can do something interesting. Maybe take away plus wall and suddenly they go up in value. But that's the kind of interesting card you want. You want there to be, as you change rules, different cards gain value. This is a card that is not actually that important to the standard rule set, but might be really good on other rule sets. And I think inserting that kind of card in is really good, and I'm glad there are more 7571s in the new decks that were just made. But they're not a card we're going to talk about today because I don't think there was ever much risk that it would be too powerful. And the cards we're going to talk about today, I think there's at least a case that there is risk to it being too strong, even if I'm going to conclude definitely not too strong. So we're going to count down. I picked 14 types of cards. Sometimes there's only one card that fits that. Sometimes there's multiple options. I'm not going to look at really standard cards. Like 6632s are really good on level 3. 8764s are really good on level 7. 8765s are really good on level 8. You might have different picks for these levels, but these cards are certainly up there for some of the best cards. 8866s or 8876s, almost everyone thinks at least one of those is really good, though people vary on which they like. Same with A964s and A955s. I personally kind of like A964s more, but obviously the 5.5 is a very powerful effect. But at least one of these things you'll think like, yeah, that's a super good card, and lots of the cards we're looking at today, it's not at all clear they're better than one of, or even any of these cards. And that's okay. These are cards that feel to me Now, A964s are in the original game, A955s are not, so that might be a good example of sort of can this boundary be pushed, and it turns out to be fair. And I think it does turn out to be fair. They're great cards, but they're not. If they're better than A964s, it's pretty close. So I don't really want to consider these. I want to consider the boundary pushing cards more, though there will be a few conventional cards discussed today. I'd also like to say I did a bunch of checking for stuff, but I easily could have missed some lower level stuff. And yeah, if I did, apologies, feel free to yell at me. I also, a lot of these cards are no longer in rotation. They've been changed, subbed out, and I never played with them. And it's really easy to misvalue something you've never played with. I think there's a lot of thinking that's useful that you can do theoretically, but even if you think you're really good at that theorizing, and I have a big ego, I think I'm pretty good at that theorizing. I don't think I can ever have that much confidence without playing with them. So if like any player comes along and is like, I played with that, it is way better than you think. Like, yeah, they're probably right. So yeah, feel free to be like, please don't be like, you're an idiot, but feel free to be like, yeah, if you had played with this, you would think something different here. I want to thank Shabrang for the idea to do this video. I think it was a neat idea, and I had fun putting this together. And I also want to thank Dalamar for helping me get a lot of images of cards that no longer exist. It turns out some of them are available if you click credits and the deck makers. There are actually links to the original decks, and you can see a lot of old cards that are not around today, some of which I remember from early on in my time, but some of which were from way before my time. And that was really cool to see and look through. But he also found other cards that aren't available that way, and we're going to get to see some of those images here. So if not for Dal, this whole video would have looked like this. This is me drawing a blue Nanaki card. Colored blue on the outside, so you know it's blue. Yeah, excellent job by me. I have no idea when I accidentally made that arrow at the bottom. I actually hadn't noticed that till now. I'm great at writing eights, doesn't look like a child at all. Yeah, so thanks to Dal, or this video would have had a lot more beautiful art like this. Graphic design is my passion. I hope that's very clear in my videos. God, I'm horrible at it. Okay, anyhow. 14th, we're doing A88s. I think these are really interesting cards, and we have a whole variety of them. You can see on the left a new A88 that was just added. Can you find the card here that is no longer in rotation? I bet you can. But there is one card here that is not currently a card you can play with. Um, yeah, my traditional way of thinking of card power, and I have a few adjustments I'd like to make and maybe talk about during these videos, is tri-directional, corner power, dynamic power. Where tri-directional often says, does this card, through its pure power, have enough power facing three directions that it is pretty easy to set up as a sweeper and is a really good chance to sweep an endgame, as long as its one bad direction isn't super relevant. And these A88s are quite good at sweeping endgames if they're correctly oriented. If, for instance, Sephiroth knows he's going to land on the bottom of the board, there's a very good chance he's going to do a lot of damage at the end of a game. And these are good tri-directionally. You know, if the last two squares are going to be 7 and 8, if they go in 8, Sephiroth has a very good chance to be good. If they go in 7, it's still hard for them to dodge Sephiroth's impact. And a lot of two-directional big corners, imagine like an A9-4-3, really good at taking something, but really hard at taking anything behind it. Has very little chance to get that kind of perfect sweep. You can still definitely win games with them, but it is harder to close out games on first turns with them because it's much harder to line them up as sweepers than it is to line up a card like this. So tri-directionality, these cards are really good. As corner cards, A8 is the third best you can get after AA and A9. I would count A8 as a little better than 9-9. Your mileage may vary, but it's pretty good as a corner card. And dynamic, it comes with a double number, and we all know how good double numbers are. These seem like they should have a lot of power. And there are players who have played them and clearly played, good players, as if these are some of the best cards available. I know that Kazik in the Vincent finals played a mostly A88 hand, and Turds in the winning Vincent hand also used an A88. These are good cards, but they are not as good cards as you would think. because they really struggle. Like they get kind of exponentially worse for every 9 that is in either player's hand. They are so clunky at dealing with 9s. Even if they overpower the 9, they inevitably have an 8 sticking out at least in one direction that gives the opponent a lot of combo potential. 8s are very easy to hit if they're left lying around. And if they overpower a 9, they're going to have an 8 lying around. It's sometimes you'd prefer in some spots like 8A11 to 8A18 because the 8A11 could take and not be hit on the counterattack. And these always kind of have something that gets countered. And if there are 9s in other directions, they just can't take them and they can't interact that well with them because you need more 9s to appear to start setting these up. And you don't want those more 9s to appear because unless they line up exactly for you, they're so bad for you, which means you're not going to run a hand with many more 9s in it, which means you can't use it to set up your 8s to have the doubles face doubles. And it just, if you could guarantee a world where your opponent cannot use any cards with 9s, these are really good cards. In a world where your opponents can use 9s, they're fine. They're totally reasonable. You don't want to use a huge mass of them because then they all drop off so much if there are 9s, but they're completely fine cards to use. I will also mention I have a lot of videos where I talk about stuff like this, though I think none of them released by the time this comes out. But I tend to prefer what I think of as spear cards to wheel cards, where a spear card is something where the best number is surrounded by the other numbers. So the cards on the left, right, top, and bottom of the screen, like Nuge 18A8, or at the bottom A828, or on the sides 8A81 and 818A. I usually think these are a little better than the wheel cards, and I think this is true for A88s. I have a slight preference. It's close, but I have a slight preference for the spear version of this. I think of the spear as the highest number has the next two highest numbers surrounding it, and a wheel as you can go around the card from the highest to the lowest number and always go to equal or lower numbers going there. There's nothing that interrupts that. Okay, let's move on to 13th. A9 7 ones. So originally we had Vincent, and it's possible the first one we actually had was Edge 97A1. I'd never seen this card before. This was not reminiscent to me at all. Thanks again to Dalamar for helping find a bunch of old cards that were just completely unfamiliar to me. Deli was like, "Oh yeah, I remember that card," but from my time, I don't remember that card at all. 7A19 is obviously the newest edition, but the more interesting edition is we've had Vincent for a long time. And Vincent clearly has this unique power. Until this came into play, there were no cards that had an A9 where the next number could be higher than a 6. And so this risks what if that next number is a 7? And anytime you up the max power available, like of the top number, the second best, or the third best number, you can make a huge difference to stuff. I think it turned out here it wasn't that impactful. The 7 doesn't combine with much else on the card. In general, you want plus walls to hit something you couldn't take already. It's nice that the 9 and the 7 can plus wall 8s now, which the 9 and the 6 could not, but the 9 and a 6 could plus wall 7s. There are sometimes 7s, there are sometimes 8s. There's not, given that you're already taking both, there's not like 7s are slightly more common than 8s, I think, but it's very close. Like these are numbers on level 10 you're seeing basically the same amount of. I did count at one point. It's possible it's like tied. It's very close though. 8s and 7s. I think 7s and 6s are both slightly more frequent than 8s, but I could be remembering completely wrong. But the point is, being able to plus wall 8s is just not particularly better than being able to plus wall 7s. And so the 9-7 part doesn't really help much. And the 9 can already take 8s or 7s. So the question is not, am I taking something new I couldn't take before, but is this something I want to have more combo power against? And it's very unclear that you do. So this ended up not being that strong an effect, and Vincent is not a card you'll see used that much. But recently, we pushed boundaries again. In general, horizontal vertical cards are weaker than big corner cards. Not necessarily the case, but usually the case. And we tried A9 corners with 7 as the third number. And it turned out this was totally fine to allow too. And I really like when stuff like this is tried. I can be a bit complaining, but I like when stuff that pushes a boundary is tried. And if it turns out, yeah, this was too much, we can change it later. That's fine. But we can see, is this something that we can add to the pool and it doesn't ruin things, but it's an exciting new type of card to play with. And I think these A973s at the bottom were really nice additions to the field and ended up, because just the 7-9 interaction is not that good, ended up being just reasonable cards that you can happily use. I was thinking of including in the video 1789s because we tried a similar thing with those, and those are more meta defining. Those are really important to the level 8 meta. I should have included those in this video. I forgot to. It was an idea in my head. Those are interesting cards to discuss as well, but I guess I already missed my chance. So let's move on to number 12. If only I knew how to edit videos. Number 12, we got Landis at level 3. Level 3 is generally dominated by things like 6632s, 6622s, 7541s. 1666 is more raw power, and 1666 can beat almost any card at least two ways, except for a 6-6 corner or the kind of awkward 7-6s that level 3 has. It's a lot of power, and repeat numbers, even on levels where you're not facing tens, will always have value. But the fact that it does have a triple number and three numbers that are like fairly high means if you are porting this over to a multi level rule set, it's gonna scale well, right? It has a really useful effect for facing higher level numbers. Um, but actually, maybe I should have had this lower. No, it's better than the A97s, but it's not it's not game breaking or anything. 6632s and 6622s are very happy to see it because those cards are so delighted to see other sixes, and this doesn't have as much combo potential back. It obviously has a lot of same potential against them, but plus wall is just much more reliable than sames or pluses are. And so a lot of the things that play well on the level play well against it specifically, which, even though it has a third six, which is just a hugely powerful thing, I don't think it ends up really breaking what's going on. And while it's a lot of times banned from level 3 tournament rule sets, when it isn't, it's a useful card, a very reasonable choice, and one that certainly can have good tournament results. I don't think it makes your hand any worse to include, but it's not one where you look at it and you see the other player didn't use it and you go, ah, the Landis player has a serious advantage here. All right, moving on to 11th, we have the 888s. And for what it's worth, I've basically never played with this. When I started, we had Boko, the 8882. That changed to Final Aeon, which I forgot about, thanks to Seto for reminding me that card existed. And these are neat cards, but the triple number effect is very strong on level 9 or 10, where you're facing A's. But the 2 doesn't combine with the 8s at all. There's like, you see some 4s, but this is just, it's an X number. Like, it's just a random 0 effect kind of thing that occasionally happens to pay off. So it's really, what's the value of 3 8s? And much like A88s, the value of 3 8s in a world where 9s exist is, I think, not that high. It's not 0. Like, it's good. Like, these are good cards. I'm not saying these are bad cards, but they're somewhat limited. The 1888, by the way, I'd never seen before. That's from before my time. That's also a level 9. But the real powerful one that people liked was Nanaki, the 5888. Now, I think hitting 7s for plus walls is like the ideal number to hit. So I think in general, you want your plus wall number, your kind of supporting number, to help you hit numbers that are the top options on the level. And the top options are A and 9, and the 5 does not help you there at all. Usually you want to target the top two numbers, and the 5 is not good for that. But on level 10 specifically, anything that hits 8s or 7s has to have some value too. So I do think the 5888 is better than the other cards by a substantial margin, even though they are available at a lower level, which of course means they will face weaker cards in opposition. And even though the 5, like the 6 would be a game changer. because the 6 means those 8s kill anything except for 9s. But the five's not that much of a game changer, but it is good enough that I think it's the best of these cards. Obviously, it's the best of these cards, but the best of these cards adjusted for the fact that it's on a higher level. My suspicion, though, and clearly it was changed for a reason, my guess looking at it is this would not be a game breaking card. But I also think it was reasonable to start getting rid of a lot of triple numbers on level 9s and 10s. I think they're a very easy crutch. But my guess on this card is it's really good, but not better than where I'm putting it. And I bet there are going to be a bunch of comments being like, nah, you're wrong. And I probably am. Let's move on to the next one. That's just where my thinking on this card is. 7671's very interesting card. The 6717 King Behemoth is a very important card in the history of Triple Triad because one of the most famous hands, not of the initial era, um, but of my time, besides like Haley Carnasso playing their hand 10,000 times, is the Piggyman SPC level 5 hand. And 6717 was a centerpiece of this hand that really is a lot of raw power, but landed in 2 so often, just saying, I'm going to have, or 8, but often 2, saying, I'm going to have 7s facing out. You can't take me with plus wall off. And my 7s facing out really set up my other cards to do damage. And that was a really cool hand, and I really liked it. You did not see a ton of this card outside of that. And the question is, I talked about 7571. Is 7671 that good? And in a sense, it must be. Because the highest numbers are 7 and 6. And this is just, you have 3 of those, which every card that has 3 of those is a pretty good card. This has to be good. And not only that, but you're the only one that has 3 of those and has 2 7s on this level, which seems so powerful. But none of the stuff lines up for any plus walls. And it turns out dynamism's really important compared to raw power. And so it just ends up as this is a very good card, but it is not a game breaker. And I do think Piggy found a really cool use for it. I love that hand is just a fascinating hand and one of the really interesting things in Triple Triad history. But I think this just has to come down as a very good card that probably you did have to get rid of, but it's not game breaking. You see these number sets sometimes on level 6 as well. Like I think 7671 or some iteration of this does exist on level 6. And obviously that's a level with 8s, but just because it has no plus wall potential, it's not a real thing. This is, 7673s are basically only used on rule sets where no 8s are allowed. Um, so it ends up being a less powerful card than its raw power would ever lead you to believe, but still quite a powerful card. In ninth, so this was an old card, no longer in existence, but 2661 at level 2. So 6's best friends are 2s. You may notice that 6622s, now they're available at a lower level, but they get more play than 6633s do. 2 is a very good friend to 6's and just lets them sweep. And this is a 6/6 card at level 2 with a 2. So there might be 6611s, I'm not sure, I didn't actually check. But 6621 is so much better than a 6611. So even if there are other 6/6s, which I'm not sure there are, this is by far the best 6/6. This seems to me like an incredibly powerful card at level 2. I kind of like when there's exactly one card like this because it's sort of an auto pick, but it's an auto pick in the sense that your opponent also knows it's an auto pick. And it's great, but I don't think it's single-handedly going to like sweep that many endgames because it's a great corner and it's got good dynamism, but it's not three-directional. And if it's not three-directional, I think this is a great card that makes your hand substantially better, but it is not going to sweep endgames in a way that makes the game just over if you can align the game at all correctly for it. The opponent will always have some resources to dodge behind it. That gives up some cards elsewhere, but there are ways to work around it if it's not tri-directional. And so to me, that makes this a card that it's very powerful, probably shouldn't be the case, but also it's okay to have one of these. Because also, if you only have one, it makes it easy for your opponent to go, okay, that's a card to be worried about. I gotta make sure I can deal with that. And that has interesting kind of meta defining qualities. So I'm really intrigued by this card. I think it existed at the start of my time. I feel like I've seen it before. Very interesting level 2 card. Very powerful. Doesn't ruin the level or anything, I think. Despite being very, very powerful. Maybe I should have ranked it higher, though. It is very good. AA corners. Now, there are AA rares that are not corners, but as I said earlier, usually corners are the best card. There is some argument whether the level 9 version is better, because, again, if you can get the same basic value and you can get it at a lower level, that means, you're not going to use a level 9 card in level 10 games, but if you could run an A964 at level 9, it would be better than an A964 at level 10 because it's facing against weaker opposing cards. So there is a case that Doom Train, or if you really want a plus wall against 9s, Zerace, are the best of these. My instinct is it might still be Adia, that the double numbers, the 3/3 backside, is really good, but there's also a very good case for Doom Train. In the recent TTAC semifinals, Seto was playing a Doom Train corner hand against Akiyama, and like switching between Doom Train and Zerace. And it was just so clear he could get an advantage every game without having to, like, it didn't matter what Akiyama's hand was. Like, he was getting an advantage on first turn, a clear advantage where he could push for something every game without having to worry about getting counterhanded or anything like that. Like, every game Akiyama had the corner covered, and it didn't matter. It was advantageous for Seto. On first turn, these cards are so powerful because you can basically do what Seto did, where you have an AA corner, and then you have something like, say you have Doom Train and 4499. And you can just sit on the 4499. Whenever they take Doom Train, you take back. And you're going to flip whatever they took it with most likely, because unless they took it with an AA corner, they took it with something less powerful. And they just can't touch it and they can't interact with it. And it's just so unpleasant to deal with. And you have two cards for the same corner, but you got to get rid of one of them immediately and the other one plays well. And like, if you have a 9/9 corner, to take it both directions, you need something with power facing it. The only things that can take it both ways are an A9 or an AA corner, and both of those have all their power facing it. But with an AA corner, you can have something that takes it both ways and has all the power facing away from it, so whenever it lands next to it, it can also do other damage. It's such a powerful effect. These are really game warping. And I think one of my biggest weaknesses before I quit in like 2012 or 2013 was I got overly scared of rares. I got so bothered by them that I would run so many double numbers to make sure I could never get screwed by them, and ended up just running kind of weak hands that didn't have enough raw power because I just basically had the belief I can eventually outplay anyone if I'm not screwed by the starter. And so I got so focused on I must not ever be screwed by the starter that I just started playing weaker and weaker hands until they just became unviable. And that was something I wanted to not do again in my return to the site, and I think so far I haven't. But I was card selecting hands at that point, which also is not something I should have been doing. But yeah, rares are a real threat, and they are a real danger. I was not wrong to be afraid of them. Rares are very powerful, as much as I rag on them, specifically the corner rares with hands built around them. This is a very powerful effect, and it's not so much that they're so hard to take, it's that it's so easy to have a card that recaptures them both ways, making them just so unpleasant for your opponent to play around. Um, yeah, very powerful effect. Again, not sweepers, but the way they're used, the 2661, because of the 2, should be used not as like your starter, probably, though it's a very good corner at level 2, but should probably be used as this can take almost anything. AA corners should be much more often used as like a starter. It's a very different kind of card, despite looking quite similar. Like, this is a huge corner at the level with a weak backside, but they play really differently. But it's a really, really powerful effect. Okay, seventh, we have A666s. I did cross over with Erdrick. I did not think Erdrick was a game breaking card at the time. And maybe that means I should have this lower. But I also don't know how good I trust my evaluations from 2008. Triple numbers are obviously a very powerful effect. If you are worried about rares, this kind of solves all of them very quickly because even the rares it can't immediately take, it's very easy to set up against. So you like run one of these cards, Erdrick or Sephiroth, and you almost don't have to worry at all about setting up against other A's. So it just makes hand building really safe because you're very unlikely to be screwed off the start. And actually, maybe in my later phase of being so scared about rares, if there had still been cards like this, I would have just run them and only had to run one card to cover so much more, rather than having to run multiple cards to do that, leading to my hands being weaker than they would have been if these cards existed. So I think of these as sort of, what's the word? Like, they create space for you to do other things. They're not enhancers, but they're sort of like, they cover enough things that the rest of your hand is free to do what they want. They make it so you don't have to worry about a bunch of things. I am just not finding the word I'm looking for. But that's really neat, and they do so in a way unlike 888s that still have a 10 on them. And 10s are just really good. Like, it's just really good to have a 10 on the card. So my instinct, despite the fact that 888s kind of play very well against these, and these play pretty badly against 888s, my instinct is that these are better, and that these are a little more warping of what's possible. I think in a world with A666s, fewer rares are getting run, or you're running rares with these, which might mean more rares. Fewer rares are getting run without these, more rares are getting run with these. And that's gonna have a bunch of effects, but yeah, I think they're quite strong. The whole kind of third through 10 range, I rate all these cards fairly close. If I have something ninth and something else fourth, that doesn't actually mean I think they're that far apart. I think these are all just very powerful effects. In sixth, we have Larsa and Robo. I decided to check TTN here and notice there were cards like it. Robo is no longer in effect. Larsa is. We talked about A9 7s. A9 8s are a lot better than A9 7s because the 8 and the 9 means the 9 now can take other 9s. And that is where the biggest jump comes. When you help a number take something that like adds to what it could take before by one. Maybe not always the case. Like, there is a question, if you have a 6 and you're trying to take 6s and 7s, would you rather a 2 that helps you now you take everything 6 and below? Or would you rather have a 3 that lets you take 5 and below, but also 7s? And it depends. On level 5, you'd rather the 3. On level 3 or 4, on level 3, you'd rather the 2. On level 4, you can argue either way. So there's some variety. It depends on what numbers you're seeing and what the frequency of those are. But even on level 5, there are usually more 6 or as many 6s as 7s, and sometimes more. So, anyways, 8 is a much better kind of ally to the other numbers on the cards than 9 is. So I see this as much better than A9 7s, like more better than just one upgrade. Like, if it was A9 7 2 versus A9 8 1, I don't think it's close. If it was A9 7 3 versus A9 8 1, I don't think it's close. I don't know how high that number has to get before it catches up, but we have an A973 now, and I think it is substantially weaker than the A981s. Larsa is a semi-rare and the only one of these currently playable on TTA. TTN experiments with other number combos more and does ambitious stuff, and I think that's really neat. I think that's a really good place to experiment with more ambitious number combos like this A982. On TTA, we have A918, and as I said, I usually think spear cards are better than wheel cards, and I think that is the case here. I think Larsa is a better card than Robo, and seeing Yojimbo use cards like Larsa increased my appreciation for pure power tridirectional cards. of which it is an incredible card. And probably the single best level 10. That doesn't mean, like, if you're given a level 10 rule set that allows it, that doesn't mean you should use it. Um, Stuffed Turds Finals and Triad Wars is possibly an argument that it isn't. But I think it is. I do think it's also hard to build hands around it. There's not quite the synergies for it to go off. It doesn't have like an opposite. A964s are massively helped by having opposites. A955s are massively helped by having opposites. It doesn't quite have the synergies some other things do. Like you could try Uber, but it's not the same. But I think on its own, it should be considered the most powerful level 10 card. But in a world where synergies are what matters, it drops off quite a bit and becomes an important card, a very good card, but not a meta defining card, if that makes sense. Which possibly means I should have it higher because I do think it's the best level 10 in the game, but possibly means I should have it lower because some of the previous cards we've talked about I think are more meta defining. All right, in fifth, we have the good 7/6s on level 3. So there is some dispute on level 4 over whether 7/6 3/2s or 7/6 4/1s are better. In general, 7/6 4/1, the 4 powers up the 7, and the 4/1 can pick off 7s. 7/6 3/2, the 3/2 part can't really pick off anything, but the 2 and 3 make the 6 incredible. There is a case either way. I don't know where I stand. There tend to be more pairs for 7/6 3/2s, and 7/6 3/2s end up working really well in pairs. So 7/6 3/2s are definitely more common, but I'm not sure if they're actually stronger. I would call it very neutral. Now, two of these cards no longer exist. The only one that does is Hectize, the 4/1/7/6. Again, when there is one card that is a bit stronger but not breaking the game, I think that's pretty cool because it makes it a very good pick. But if you don't pick it, you know your opponent is likely to do it and you can plan against it. While if there's this effect a few different ways, it's very hard to cover all of them and you kind of have to give in and just use them. Here on level 3, you do not have to give in. It is okay not to use it, you just have to be aware that your opponent will. And I like that. I think you could get rid of 4/1/7/6. It's clearly the best level 3, but allowing it is by no means the end of the world. Again, this is helped by the fact that these are basically two directional cards. You know, it's not like a 7/6/7/1 on level 4 or level 3 would be super game breaking because it would just sweep every endgame and be really dominant. This doesn't sweep every endgame. So I'm sort of never quite as worried about huge corners as I am about tri directional cards. Like Larsa is more likely to break the game than these are. But these are very, very strong. These are good level 4s available at level 3. Something I'll say, I was having conversation with Turds recently sort of about this. And I don't quite know how I want to put this into words. I think I'll find a way to say this better and make a video about it at some point. On level 3 and 4 and 5, if you have a 7 and 4 on a card, it almost always plays better if the 4 is next to the 7. Like 3/6/7/4 versus 4/6/7/3. I Turds was saying like 3/6/7/4 is just better. And I think he's right. I think it plays a lot better, and I'm not entirely sure yet how I want to articulate why. Work in progress. But I think 1/6/7/4 is better than 4/1/7/6. I think it's safer to print 4/1/7/6s. This isn't always true. It's not that you always want the helper number next to the big number. Sometimes you want it across. But with 7s and 4s, it seems to be you want it next to. And I think that's pretty consistently true. And so I think the 4/1/7/6 is safer to allow than 1/6/7/4. And 7/3/2/6 is also obviously excellent. These are just great level 3s. And yeah, just really powerful. One of them still in effect. Use it if you can. 999. I have never played with this. This is way before my time. it is really hard for me to evaluate because it does something that nothing I've seen can do. This takes so much stuff, and even nines, it doesn't mind seeing because it's gonna have like same potential. There's like no number this doesn't want to see. I think its least favorite number probably is more nines. I think I wouldn't run a mass nine hand around this. I think I'd run like a bunch of tens and eights, just stuff it can just sweep. But this is going to be so good at sweeping endgames because it is tri-directional. It hits so many numbers. There is no number that is confident it can give this card a headache. Like, oh, this is so good. Maybe its worst nightmare is a ton of 8876s because they have more combo potential. It has no combo potential really naturally against them, and they have a lot against it. But it can take them, right? It can just stay in hand and sweep some endgame. Oh, now I'm thinking about this card. This might be the best card. Or, like, not the best card, but very good. I am very high on this card. I quite like Shuyan 9289, and this seems to me substantially better. Maybe I'm wrong, because the 8 is really good with the 9s. And the 9 isn't good with the 9s in the same way, but it is good with the 9s because you're just taking more 10s. So I guess the argument that I'm overrating it is maybe this isn't that much better than Shuyan. If you look at level 9 and you compare cards like 9-9 corners to 8-9-8s, the 9-9 corners do not play that much. Like the 8-9-8s are better than the 9-9 corners. Like 8-9-8s in general are a little better than 9-9-7s. So there's a case here. Now that's is an 8-9-8 versus a 9-9-8, but 8-9-8 versus 9-9-8 is pretty close. Like you'd think the 9-9-8 might be a bunch better. It's not that much better. It's pretty close. It's better, but it's not that much better. So the case against this card is Shuyan is a good card, but not a great card. Very usable, but very easy not to use. Maybe going to get more use now that it has a paired card in one of the new decks. But it's not a card that really plays well with pairs. It's more just a card that is good and exists happily in your hand. So the argument against this would be we've seen examples of cards with 8s and 9s, and switching an 8 to a 9 is not that great. And the argument for it is yes, it is that great. 999 is just an incredibly powerful effect we have never seen on another card, and this is just incredible. I wonder if there's any 999s on TTN. I think I looked through them and didn't see one. I did look through the level 10s, and if there is one, I missed it. But oh man, this is a strong effect. I don't feel that comfortable putting it that high without having seen it in play. Incidentally, I thought about putting cards from other sites on because other sites have messed with having higher numbers, but TTA is kind of kept close to the initial FF8 vision, I think very smartly and thoughtfully. And I wanted to kind of stay close to that too. Like the Czech website, I think had a AAA9, or like I don't know where the 9 was, but 3 A's and a 9, for instance, as a card. And I don't want to mess with that. I think it's nice to stay within our basic framework. And this does stay within that framework, but this is incredibly strong. All right, after that, it's going to seem kind of a downer to go to my number 3 because I just think 6763s are incredible. Now, thinking about it a little more, I'd like to move this down at least one slot. I think the 9s are better, but this is to me the most meta defining standard card. And I don't think it should be taken away. I think, in fact, when 6763s go, 6762s basically take the spot of everything they do and do so just as annoyingly. I think there is not a way to get rid of the effect these have on level 5. So I think we have to accept these are great on level 5. They dominate level 5. There are other options, but these are going to dominate level 5. And if you have level 5 rule sets, you kind of either need to kill 766s entirely, but then 666s and 7-7s run rampant, and I don't actually think those are substantially more fun to play with or anything. Right? The question of banning something is always what replaces it, and is that more or less interesting to play with? And I think in this case, basically level 5 is just, it's going to be level 5, and these are a part of it. But these are an incredible card. A lot of the laming that's happened over the years is stick Iron Giant or Galagros in 5 and just have these run wild around it. Or Ghost Ship back in the day with Ghost Ship. Um, these are just such good cards. The 676 is just the most powerful three directional you can have at level 5. It obviously is a very good corner value. It has 7/6 two different ways, and its dynamism plus wall, the three 6/7/6/2s are pretty close in value to these. The three or the two really help the sixes just sweep everything. If you can put, a six facing right, then your behemoths, or then your three or a five facing some in some direction, then suddenly your sixes take sixes because the seven helps you plus off the five. Your three helps your sixes take sevens. So you're just sweeping so much real estate. These are unbelievably good cards. And I think I didn't include many standard cards, but I wanted to include these because I think they really are that good. And they also scale so well with level. If you want the level fives that best sweep level threes and fours, it's these. If you want the level five that best scales up to face level sixes, you'd think it would be something that more naturally takes eights, but it basically just ends up being these anyway. I know they look clumsy against eights. They play better than you'd think. And there's probably something better designed to exactly hit eights. But on split level rule sets, these end up being really good choices anyway. They're just great cards. Uh, Nothing to be done. I'm not saying it's like overpowered and should be banned. It's just these are great cards, and I wanted to include something like these, or 8764s on level 7, or 8753s on level 6, or 8765s on level 8, that was kind of, here is a many directional standard card that just is going to exist. You definitely can't get rid of it. It's going to exist. It's clearly well within the bounds, and it's just a super powerful card. And to me, 6763s is the pinnacle of this type of card. All right, our runner up, we have the 8861 corner. Now, we have 8861s non corners in play, and they are good cards that are not game breaking. But there was once an 8861 corner. Now, come to think of it, I would like to lower this like 3 or 4 spots. I think I'm wrong. But I also think this is really good. What's the highest number available? 8. This is an 8/8 corner. What is the number 8 wants most as a friend? 6. This is the card that does it. And this is the only card that does it while having the 8s as a corner. And it's pretty good tri directional value. The 6 is a really good kicker, as it were, if we put this in poker terms. So it's 8/8 with a really good kicker that also gets to plus wall everything. And so it's sort of in that space where it's the best corner available. It's got pretty good dynamism, and it has that tri directional power. It's very good. The one thing that makes me really hesitate here is you could argue A169 with somewhat similar reasoning, though it doesn't have the dynamism, should be the best level 9 of standard level 9s. I mean, it's possible it is, but like it doesn't really outperform A943s or any kind of other A9. It's just kind of, or A944s. It's a reasonable card to use, and it doesn't really stand out. And I look at this card and I can't tell, is it just doing something incredible that no other card on the level can touch? Or is it like an A169 and it kind of like once you've played with it, like, yeah, it's a good card. It's a max corner with a nice kicker, but it is not notable. Now this should be better than A169. It should be. The 6 helps the 8s way more than the 6 helps the 9 or the A. So it's got to be better. But also, level 7 is a very powerful level, while level 9 is a pretty clunky level. So the cards it's fighting against for being a great card are significantly better. Yeah, I might be totally wrong. This might be much lower. If you've played with this, I'd be really curious. My instinct looking at it, first instinct was this should be the best. Now looking at it, I'm thinking level 7 is really strong, so it's harder to stand out as that much more powerful. And what if it's got A169 energy where it's good but being more tri-directional doesn't mean it actually works as a tri-directional sweeper. Like the 6 can't ever or is can sometimes take other 6s due to sames, but basically doesn't take 7s, doesn't take 8s, doesn't have help from the 1. I don't know. 2 seems a little high. I would like to switch this with Saban Edgar. I would like to move that up to number 2 and drop this to number 4, maybe lower, but somewhere in that kind of 4 through 9 or 10 pack. I think are all pretty close, and it could probably go just wherever in that pack. But I'm now sold on Saban Edgar now that we've talked it through. And my number 1 pick for best card, this will surprise no one. It is a card that does currently exist and is reliably banned from tournaments. It's Hildebrand Manderville. You see some cards like this on TTN, and I think that's totally fine. Also, notice the TTN versions are the Spear version, which should probably be slightly better. But there is one big difference. The TTN versions are on level 10, and Hildebrand Manderville is on level 9. Now, A991 is the best level 10 I think ever printed. And it hasn't been printed on level 10, it's printed on level 9, where its competition is substantially weaker. This means I think there is no situation where it is allowed where you should ever not choose this card. I think it is meta defining in the sense that it is always correct to choose and always the best card available. It did not guarantee a win. I remember some games, I think played by Vid. I forget if he was using it or his opponent was. But I vaguely remember some tournament match where it was allowed, and I do think Vid was using it, or his opponent was. Maybe it was Vid Yevon in TTAC a couple years ago. I'm not sure. It didn't dominate like you might think, but I don't care about that evidence. I think this is so clearly the best card, the most powerful card. It is the, it has the second best maximum corner. It is the absolute best tri-directional. A's and 9s play great together. This is so good against so many things. The worst card any A88 or A864 or 65 could see. 9/9s hate seeing it. It loves seeing all these cards. What does this card not like seeing? The bottom filled up? But like every card's gonna have one thing it doesn't like seeing. And yeah, this is just the best card in the world. It is by, and if it was on level 10, there would be other cards that were somewhat close in power, but on level 9, it is not remotely competitive. And I think basically every tournament rule set correctly bans it. If there was a rule set like level 10 and they just added level 9 to the rule set, you should still use this card 100% of the time. And if there was a like your hand gets better, it got more power. Like if they said must use one level 9, your hand should get weaker. But no, it gets better. And it gets better not because you have some crazy synergy like, ooh, level 9 has my setup card I'm going to drop in 5, and there wasn't that option at level 10. I actually wanted the lower numbers. No, instead, you are getting higher, more powerful numbers at level 10. I will also say it sort of breaks the rules because what you see with rares in general is actually lower total power, but it can break some rule. So, like Power Seraph 1393, you add up those numbers, it adds up to 16. You look at other level 5s, like 6763, for instance, adds up to 22. This is, in fact, a very weak total power, but it has one thing it does that breaks the rules. And that's actually a pretty cool way for rares to work, because they don't have this overpowering of like, oh, you just get to use a higher level card. Instead, it's you get to use a card that can do one thing unbelievably well that breaks the paradigm of that level. But in exchange for it, you're making a huge sacrifice in 3 other directions. So I've always thought rares were bad, but I think they're interesting. And by bad, I don't mean they shouldn't exist, though I sometimes sound like that. I mean, I think they are inferior cards to use. I think, there are no rule sets, no rules sets where they're good cards. But I think in general, they're weak cards that have a really interesting effect. When I say rares suck, I'm not saying rares shouldn't exist. I am saying rares do not have much competitive use. Once you hit level 9 and 10, that changes, as we've talked about. But this is a rare that is breaking the number cap. Other level nines, the highest third power number, if you have an A and a 9 as the first two, is a 6. This is shattering that, but it's also shattering the maximum power allowed. And this is not how rares work with any other rare in the site's history, as far as I know, where every other rare is it is in fact significantly below the power cap, but it is above the sort of max corner or max single number cap. Hildebrand tries to do something different, and again, I think that is good to try. I like exploring that space, and I really like exploring it on TTN, where all the wild number combos just feel more like the Wild West, and it's just cool to play around with, and I think it's neat and a great place to do so. Like if they wanted to experiment with like what if the total power on a card could go up to 30 instead of 29, TTN would be a great place to do so. But printing this card at level 9, I think at some point will be changed and should be changed so that level 9 rule sets don't have to constantly dodge the use of this card. But I do think it's just clearly the best card ever printed. I don't think there's much argument. I think if it was on level 10, it would also be the best card ever printed. Not just because it's the strongest, which it is, because something like if the best card ever printed was on level 4, obviously like level 8s are stronger cards, but it dominates its meta so much, I would still call it the best card ever. But this is the most powerful card total and the most above, and it's printed a level below stuff where that would all still basically be true. So Hildebrand Manderville is the most broken card ever. And if we look back, I think it might be the only card I consider just fully broken. 8861, I'm really curious now. I don't know how good I think this is. 6763s are great, but not broken. I mean, they're broken, but they're not super broken. This card I'm fascinated by now. I think it's great, but I'm not entirely sure. These cards are clearly just so strong on level 3, but not the end of the world. Like, level 3s play okay against level 4s. These are good level 4s, but they're still just level 4s. Larsa is excellent, but without having natural synergies, not at all game breaking. I think A666s are okay, but I get the impulse to get rid of triple numbers on level 9 and 10, and I think that's reasonable too. Rares are not to my taste. They are very powerful, but they are a limited effect. They can't sweep that well. This card's sick. That card's very good. Yeah, these very good, not game breakers. These I'm even skeptical of and probably underrating. Yeah. I think looking at these cards, like these seem like they should break the power level. Um, but I don't think they did. This is the best level 2, but maybe not the end of the world. Yeah. I think this is so good, but this is now fascinating to me. I'm so interested in this card. But yeah, I think this is the one card of all these cards I look at, and I think there are reasonable decisions to not allow lots of the other cards, but it would strike me as also reasonable to allow them, but I say that having not played with them. So if you've played with them, maybe you correctly conclude unreasonable. But this is the one I look at and I go, this card cannot exist. This card is broken. This is the most broken card. And hopefully I explain myself reasonably. Oh, I've been going an hour? Jesus Christ. Sorry I went so long. Did not mean to. Have a good night.